2009, the first sequence begins. Dr. Josef Heiter, a retired and internationally renowned surgeon in Germany, is known for separating conjoined twins. After leaving legitimate medical practice behind, he becomes obsessed with creating his own masterpiece, a being connected by a single digestive system. His goal is to surgically attach humans mouth to anus, forming what he calls the Human Centipede. From what we can gather, Dr. Heiter looks like he's in his late 50s or early 60s, which puts his birth somewhere around the 1950s. While living in isolation deep in the woods, Heiter begins preparations, acquiring medical equipment, studying muscle tissue, and diagramming his 3-dog experiment. This would be one of his earliest prototype in which he successfully connected 3 Rottweilers into a single organism. All 3 animals later died, but the experiment becomes the blueprint for what comes next. Soon after, Heiter begins searching for human subjects. Still remaining in 2009, late one night, 2 American tourists, Lindsay and Jenny, are travelling through Germany when their car breaks down. Lost and alone in the forest, they approach Heiter's home seeking for help. He drugs them and restrains them in his improvised medical ward beneath his house. Heiter abducts a 3rd victim, Katsuro, a Japanese man, to complete his design. With 3 subjects secured, he prepares for full surgical transformation. Heiter explains his plan to the captives. The front segment will eat food, the middle and rear segments will be forced to digest the waste of the person ahead. You could say that's quite a shitty position to be in. Anyway, he assigns Katsuro as the front, Lindsay as the middle, and Jenny as the rear. He surgically removes their teeth, modifies their knee ligaments to prevent standing, and connects the victims into a single being. The Human Centipede is now born. Heiter then begins training his creation like an animal, commanding it to move, eat, and obey. Katsuro attempts to resist, but their condition deteriorates. Infection begins to spread, and Jenny, the final segment, becomes septic and begins to die. As this happens, 2 detectives arrive to investigate the missing tourists. Heiter stalls them, but suspicion grows and they eventually return to search the property. Katsuro, realizing the hopelessness, cries out a final apology for his failures in life and ends himself using a shard of glass. A confrontation erupts between Heiter and the detectives. In the struggle, Heiter is fatally shot. One detective also dies from a wound and the other collapses from blood loss. With everyone in the house now dead or dying, Lindsay remains alone, still attached to the corpse of Katsuro, while Jenny dies behind her. The timeline of the first sequence ends with Lindsay trapped, alive, and unable to move, the fate of the Human Centipede sealed in total isolation. 2011, the second sequence begins. The events of the Human Centipede 2 full sequence take place in London, where a man named Martin Lomax becomes fixated on the crimes of Dr. Heiter. Unlike Heiter, almost nothing is known about Martin's early childhood, but the film reveals a lifetime of trauma and abuse. Martin grew up with a violent father who sexually assaulted him, and a mother who blames him for the abuse and wished he was never born. Bullied, isolated, abused, and suffering from untreated psychological disorders, Martin becomes a product of neglect rather than design. He has no medical background, no education, and no social connections. His obsession begins when he watches the first Human Centipede, which becomes his sole source of identity, comfort, and fantasy. And if you've seen this movie, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about that, and second, you'll know that Martin enjoys the first film very much. Let's just say there's a scene involving sandpaper. Anyway, unlike Heiter, Martin has no medical training whatsoever. He works as a night security guard in a multi-story parking garage and lives alone with his abusive mother. During his late night security shifts, Martin begins targeting victims. He incapacitates them, loads them into his vehicle and stores them in a rented warehouse. And that's rented in quotation marks, by the way, as he actually killed the landlord. Unlike Heiter, who selected only 3 subjects, Martin intends to build something far grander, a 12-person human centipede. Soon, Martin has kidnapped multiple men and women, including a pregnant woman, a couple, his upstairs neighbour, and various other strangers. He also shoots his therapist, as it was suggested he was being sexually inappropriate to Martin earlier on. Among his most prized victims is Ashlyn Yenny, the actress who played Jenny from the first film, whom he lures to the UK under the false promise of an audition and blurring the lines between reality and fiction. Without knowledge, tools, or anesthesia, Martin attempts to recreate Dr. Heiter's surgery. His methods are crude and torturous. He removes teeth using a hammer. He uses household tools instead of medical instruments. He binds victims together with staples, tape, and crude incisions, not stitches. Eventually, he connects all 12 people into one chain, creating the largest centipede in the timeline. So far, the result is not a precise surgical organism like Heiter's design, but a barely functional chain of mutilated captives writhing and suffering. You must be thinking to yourself right now, boy, what would I do if I was in this position? Well, lucky you, I made a video on how to beat the Human Centipede 2, so check it out after this video and be sure to subscribe because covering the Human Centipede is slowly shaving years off my lifespan. Back to the video. The centipede immediately begins to fall apart. Infection spreads rapidly. The pregnant woman escapes and gives birth in Martin's car in what might be the toughest scene I've ever had to watch. Panic breaks out in the warehouse as the victims attempt to flee despite their condition. Martin responds with extreme violence to regain control, but the structure of the centipede collapses. Chaos overtakes the warehouse and the chain is destroyed. Ashlyn manages to escape and fights Martin successfully, asserting her dominance by sticking his pet centipede up his ass. The full sequence ends with Martin alone again in the garage, silent, having failed to manifest his dreams. The year is now 2014. The final sequence begins. The events of the Human Centipede 3 take place in the United States at the George H.W. Bush State Prison, located in a remote desert region. The prison is run by Warden Bill Boss, a violent and unstable administrator alongside his subordinate and accountant Dwight Butler. Also, unlike Heiter, no official backstory is provided for Bill Boss, not his birth, childhood, or how he rose into power. As the warden of a massive US state prison, Boss rules through humiliation, violence, and psychological torture. He is a man obsessed with dominance and terrified of losing authority after having dreams of doing so. When his prison begins collapsing under riots and scrutiny, he becomes desperate to maintain power at any cost. Dwight is obsessed with the Human Centipede films and believes that Dr. Heiter's concept can be repurposed as a form of prison control and punishment. The idea is to create a 500 prisoner centipede to eliminate disobedience and reduce costs, because technically you only need to feed one person. Consultants taking notes right now. Boss initially rejects the concept, but after losing political support and facing the threat of removal by the state governor, he becomes desperate. They begin selecting prisoners to serve as segments in what is planned to be the largest centipede ever constructed, a chain of 500 humans. Medical advisors refuse to participate, so Boss and Dwight enlist the help of Tom Six, the director and writer of these movies, playing himself, who advises them in the process, blurring the lines once again between fiction and reality. The surgery is then prepared on a massive scale. Prisoners are restrained in rows, and their teeth are removed and knees disabled. Unlike both previous centipedes, this one is not a secret medical experiment or fan recreation. It is a state-sanctioned punishment carried out on an institutional scale. The 500-person centipede is now complete, marking it as the longest in the series. As for the death row inmates, their limbs are removed and they are sewn together separately to form the human caterpillar. Once the centipede and caterpillar are revealed, the state governor inspects the prison. To Bill's surprise, the governor rejects the project, calling it inhumane and politically disastrous. The warden's attempt to justify the experiment fails. Bill snaps mentally and shoots the doctor in a final breaking point. The governor soon returns and changes his mind, stating that this is exactly what America needs. The chain of prisoners remains alive, crawling in the yard, the largest and final human centipede in the timeline. The final sequence concludes with Bill shooting Dwight and then celebrating as he overlooks his masterpiece. What began as one surgeon's grotesque medical experiment evolved into a global phenomenon. escalating from creation to imitation to mass institutionalization. As you keen-eyed viewers may have noticed, the Human Centipede timeline becomes fractured beginning with the second movie, where the first film exists as a movie, not an event. This idea is reinforced in the last movie, where both previous films exist as movies and their actors appear as themselves. Because of this, the trilogy can be interpreted in two separate timelines. Timeline A, in which the events of the first film happened in-universe and led to real-world escalation, and Timeline B, where each sequel treats the previous installment as a fictional film that inspires copycats. Both interpretations lead to the same thematic conclusion, but the trilogy's canon is intentionally self-referential, creating a looping meta timeline rather than a traditional linear one. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider giving that subscribe button a big slap, as it does support me in making more videos like this. Not that I want to cover these movies ever again, in fact. So I'll see you in the next video. Peace.